Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to grow a successful tomato plant. So growing tomatoes is actually not as hard as you may think. Whether you choose to grow your tomatoes from a container or from a seed packet, you can have a crop that is very successful by mid to late summer and see an exponential growth from those plants. One of the first things I'm going to tell you is to figure out what space you have to determine if you are going to grow your tomatoes from a seed packet or from containers, and also that will help you to know what type of tomatoes you're wanting to grow. So there are a few types of tomato plants that I like to grow. The first one are cherry tomatoes. Whether they're small or large, I like growing those type of tomatoes. It's really good to grow those in containers. They grow very, very well. Just know if you are going to grow your plants in a container, that you might have to eventually size up your containers to accommodate the growth of the plant. Now, if you're going to grow in ground, you can also grow cherry tomato plants. Tomato plants can get quite large. I am 5 feet 2 inches, and right now my plants are about that height, but I also have my plants in the ground. Now, when they were in the container, they grew about 2 to 3 feet tall, depending on the container size that you do have, which is fine as well. But just make sure that whatever type of tomato plant you're going to grow, you can accommodate that growth by whatever environment you are sticking them into. So there are so many different variety of tomato plants that you can grow, ones that I have not even mentioned yet. So definitely do your research depending on, again, your size of the space you want to grow into and just the amount of light that you can give those tomato plants. So now that we have our plants planted, we want to make sure that we can give our plants sufficient light. Sunlight is the best light for your tomatoes. If you are starting to grow your tomato plants in containers, then just move them near a window, or if it is warm enough outside, you can go ahead and put them outside in the sun. Tomatoes need full sun. They need about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. And that sunlight is going to photosynthesize those plants and really get it to be really nice and strong and big. And that is exactly what you want. So again, those hours do not need to be consecutive. Maybe in the morning time, you have a nice good amount of sunlight on the front of your lawn. And then maybe towards the evening, you get another few hours. And so as long as you get 6 to 8 hours of sunlight throughout the day for those plants, that is exactly what you want. And if you are growing in the ground, think about where you're going to place your garden bed and make sure that it does have sufficient light, because that is exactly what you'll need for a lot of your plants that are going to be in the ground. You want to make sure they have good sunlight as well. Okay, so maybe you're like me and you want to start your plants in the container and then transplant them into the ground. Well, that is definitely possible. So you want to make sure that when you plant those plants into the ground, that one, the soil that you're going to plant those tomatoes in is warm. When you plant that plant into the garden, you want to plant it deep enough so that way you want the roots to take a firm hold to the soil and go nice and deep, and that will create a nice strong plant. So that is the foundation to growing a nice strong plant, is making sure that you plant it deep. So even if you are buying a plant from a big box store, which is perfectly fine, just make sure when you do transplant it, whether it's to a container or to the garden, take off some of the bottom leaves and plant it nice and deep into the soil. So that way the plant can get nice and strong. And as it does get taller, you will have a nice, strong, sturdy plant. Okay, so the next thing that you want to do is make sure that you are watering your plants on a regular basis. Now, if they are in a container, that's why I mentioned earlier, making sure that your container has a nice, good drainage. So make sure that any container that you put your tomato plants into, you have holes underneath them so that way your plants can drain sufficiently. Now, if you are planting it into the ground that is outside, based on the temperature, you want to make sure that you are watering that soil nice and deep and thoroughly. Tomato plants need a lot of water. They need about 1 inch per week. Now, depending on the warmth that your climate is in, you may have to water it twice a day. Now, it is quite hot here in Georgia, and we're in the month of July, so sometimes depending on the heat, I will have to water my garden twice a day. Now, here's the thing about watering. Do not water when it is the hottest part of the day. If you water your plants when it's very, very hot outside, if it's not morning or evening, then what will happen is you are watering those plants, and because the water is sitting on the leaves or the roots and it's so hot outside, that water is actually going to burn the plant. So the best time to water your plant is in the morning or in the evening when it's not so hot outside. I personally like to water my plants in the evening so that way the water has time to really penetrate those roots and it can stay moist throughout the evening and even sometimes in the morning. Maybe your only time to water is in the afternoon. If you can really try to water your plants early in the morning or at night as possible. Again, you don't want to burn the roots and you don't want to burn the leaves, as that will definitely hurt your plant in the long run. So as your tomato plant gets bigger, whether that's in the ground or in a container, you want to remove those bottom stems. And that is because when you're watering your tomato plants, you don't want to water the leaves. You want to water the roots. Now again, if you're watering the roots, if you have those bottom leaves, sometimes pathogens can splash up onto those leaves and cause fungus and can cause so many different diseases to your plants later on down the line. So as your plant gets bigger, you really want to make sure that you are cutting off those bottom leaves so that way you can save your plant from future plant disease. Okay, so now that your tomato plant is getting bigger, you may notice that your plant has started to lean. Now I've seen this happen, and once it starts leaning, it's not a good thing. After all that work, you don't want to see your tomato plants break and die off because you did not support them properly. So as they get bigger, there are a couple of ways you can support your tomato plants. You can go on Pinterest or Google and research all the different ways that you can actually support your tomato plants. A couple of the ways that I like to support my plants, because they are in the ground, again, they grow about 5 feet tall. So my plants will need maybe a specific tomato cage for it. For me, I find that works best because the tomatoes I grow tend to be a little bit heavier for the stems they are on, and the tomato cages actually give a nice good bit of support for those tomato plants to grow nice, healthy, and strong, and not snap off at different parts of the stems when it storms or when it rains or when you get really, really high, strong winds. So tomato plants really need good support in order for it to grow nice, strong, healthy vegetables. So one of the things I have noticed when growing tomato plants is that sometimes the leaves can get very overwhelming and you have this nice, big, bushy tomato plant. If you have all of these leaves on your tomato plants and no tomatoes, then you start to realize, okay, I'm growing leaves and not tomatoes. We don't want to grow leaves, we want to grow tomatoes. So here is where pruning and pinching those leaves and those stems off are important, because you want to make sure that energy is going towards the tomato vegetable itself, not the actual leaves. Yes, the leaves are good for photosynthesis and for different reasons to make sure the light can reach and really give you a nice, sweet, healthy tomato, and that's what you want. So no, we don't want to take off all of the leaves and all of the stems off of a tomato plant. We just want to pinch it and prune it some so that way we can concentrate on the growth of the tomato itself. I find that when I have a lot of leaves on my tomato plants, that's when I have more of those green caterpillars, because they are able to camouflage into the leaves a little bit more. So that's another reason why I like to take off more of my leaves and stems on my tomato plants, because it encourages more growth to the tomato itself, but also it makes it easier to find those hornworms, so that way as we get to that step later, we can prevent those from eating all of our tomato plants. So when you're pinching your tomato plants, you will start to notice that you have sometimes little branches growing in between your bigger branches. And those are the stems that you actually want to take off, because those are actually not going to produce tomatoes. It's just going to be another stem that's producing leaves. Again, we want the leaves so that way they can give us nice sweet tomatoes and photosynthesize our plant, but we don't want to be growing leaves so much that we only have a little bit of tomatoes that are growing. Because tomato plants are capable of growing so many tomatoes, and as we harvest, we will get more. Tomatoes is definitely a plant that you can harvest and harvest over and over again, as long as you're able to implement these things that I'm telling you now. Okay, so a huge thing when it comes to your tomato plants is to fertilize. Fertilize, fertilize. Your plants also, not only do they need that water and that sunlight, but they also need plant food. Okay, in order for us to grow big and strong, what do we tell our kids? You have to take your vitamins, right? Vitamins help so many things within our bodies, and it is the same thing with plants. Fertilization helps them to grow and to be nice and strong and healthy, and also to give us that taste that we want in our fruit. One of the fertilizers I like to use in my tomato plants is a liquid fertilizer, and that is Miracle-Gro. They have different fertilizers that you can use, but I find the liquid ones tend to work the best because it actually can get right into those roots and penetrate deeply. I can tell a huge difference when I am fertilizing on a regular basis than not fertilizing at all. And it will definitely help with the growth of your tomatoes and just overall the health of the tomato plant as well. And my last tip for keeping nice, strong, healthy tomatoes is to treat them for bugs. Now you can go the organic way, or you can use some different pesticides that are not so organic. Just make sure you really clean off your vegetables before you eat them. So my recommendations are neem oil, and you can find this in any big box store to treat your plants. It's more organic and the scent throws the bugs off and they won't consume your vegetables as much. Now I'm not saying treating your plants for bugs is going to completely get rid of them, but it's definitely going to help slow the process down of them eating your vegetables and give you a chance to actually get them before they get to them first. Now, one of the things I have been doing is, honestly, it's not the best way that I like to do it, but it's just hand picking those worms off of those plants. The worms are going to be the things that kill your plant if you are not watching. So make sure you check on your plants every day. Those caterpillars will devour a plant, just like that book, The Hungry Caterpillar you saw in that book. It ate a hole through every single piece of fruit. That's exactly what this caterpillar will do. So make sure you're treating your plants by being very attentive, maybe just picking off the hornworms. If you don't want to do it, have somebody else do it for you. Using different oils or pesticides or homemade oils to try to make sure that you don't have those caterpillars or any other type of insect that can eat away at the stems, leaves, or the vegetables of your plant. Okay, you guys, I really hope this video has helped you to learn how to start and grow successful tomato crops. And I've also put a link in the description box below of a PDF file that I have created for you that you can print out and use for different tips along the way to help you grow those tomatoes. You can look back on this video and you can also look back at the tips that I have created on that PDF file. This will help jumpstart your journey to growing a nice healthy tomato plant, or even just your journey to gardening in general. So you guys, I will see you next time. Thank you for joining me today, and happy gardening.